Brahman is indestructible and eternally existing, and its constitution is not changed at any time. But beyond Brahman, there is Parabrahman. Brahman refers to the living entity, and Parabrahman refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The constitutional position of the living entity is different from the position he takes in the material world. In material consciousness, his nature is try to be the Lord of the matter. But in spiritual Krishna consciousness, his position is to serve the Supreme. When the living entity is in material consciousness, he has to take on the various bodies in the material world. That is called karma, or varied creation by the force of material consciousness. In Vedic literature, the living entity is called Jivatma and Brahman, but he is never called Parabrahman. The living entity Jivatma takes different position. Sometimes he merges into the dark material nature and identifies with himself with matter, and sometimes he identifies himself with superior spiritual nature. Therefore, he is called the Supreme Lord's marginal energy. According to his identification with material or spiritual nature, he receives a material or spiritual body. In material nature, he may take a body from any of the 84,100,000 species of life. But in spiritual nature, he has only one body. In material nature, he is sometimes manifested as a man, demigod, an animal, a beast, bird, etc., according to his karma. To attain material heavenly planets and enjoy their facilities, he sometimes performs sacrifices, yagna. But when his merit is exhausted, he returns to earth again in the form of a man. In the process of sacrifice, the living entity makes specific sacrifices to attain specific heavenly planets and consequently reaches them. When the merit of sacrifice is exhausted, then the living entity descends to earth in the form of rain, then takes on the form of grain, and the grain are eaten by man and transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman, and thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice, and so repeat the same cycle. In this way, the living entity perpetually comes and goes on the material path. The Krishna conscious person, however, avoids such sacrifices. He takes directly to Krishna consciousness and thereby prepares himself to return to Godhead. Impersonalist commentators on the Bhagavad Gita unreasonably assumes that Brahman takes the form of a jiva in the material world, and to substantiate they refer to chapter 15 verse 7 of the Gita. But this verse also speaks of the living entity as an eternal fragment of myself. The fragment of God, the living entity, may fall down into the material world, but the Supreme Lord Achyuta never falls down. Therefore, this assumption that the Supreme Brahman assumes the form of Jiva is not acceptable. It is important to remember that in Vedic literature, Brahman, the living entity, is distinguished from Parabrahman, the Supreme Soul, the Supreme Lord. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport. So, in answering Arjuna's question, what he had asked in the first two verses, this chapter started, Attaining the Supreme, and we just finished the last chapter, whose name was Knowledge of the Absolute. So as we discussed last time also, that we are beginning the second part of Bhagavad Gita. We have already entered into the second part of Bhagavad Gita, which is from chapter 7 to chapter 12. So first section from chapter 1 to chapter 6 is known to be the Karma Yoga. And the middle 6 chapters is known to be the Bhakti Yoga. And the last 6 chapters is known to be Jnana Yoga. So, as we understand, in Bhakti Yoga is all about the Supreme Lord and what is His nature, how do we attain Him, how do we connect to Him in the most intimate way, that becomes Bhakti Yoga. So, in the first chapter of this second section of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explained about his knowledge, about his vibhuti. about his opulences, about who will achieve him, who will not achieve him, who will understand him, who will not understand him, and what are the different obstacles a person would go through, and all these kind of things. But in the second chapter now, which we have been starting now in this eighth chapter, Arjuna picks up some important questions, a kind of summary, and then he will go on to ask that how do we achieve you? How do we achieve the Supreme Lord? That was his last question. How can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? So ultimately, now Arjuna is setting a place wherein Krishna would be explaining that what are the different ways a person can come back to him. So the chapter names becomes Attaining the Supreme. How do we attain the Supreme Lord whose knowledge is being given in the 7th chapter? So Krishna starts this chapter by saying Aksharam Brahmam Paramam Sabhavo Adhyatma Uchyate Bhuta Bhavod Bhavakaro Visarga Karma Samgitaha. So the first question what Arjuna had asked in the first verse is that what is Brahman? What is the nature of self? So this question is very important because although Krishna had already answered this question in the 2nd chapter, and all the more Krishna started speaking Bhagavad Gita by answering this question itself, what's the nature of a spirit soul, who am I, what's the purpose, who am I, what is my nature, and these kind of things. But again Arjuna is asking this question, so to answer his question, Krishna is saying in the 3rd verse, Akshara Brahmam Paramam, that the nature of Brahman is Aksharam and is Paramam. Akshara means Shara. Shara comes from the word which can fall down or which can be destroyed. But the nature of Brahman is Aksharam. Aksharam Brahma Paramam. Paramam means transcendental. Swabhava Adhyatma Uchyate. So Swabhava, that is the Swabhava, the Bhava of the Bhava of my own self. Adhyatma Uchyate. Bhuta Bhava Udbhavo Karaha Visarga Karma Samgitaham. So in this verse, Krishna is answering 2 questions. The first question which is answering of Arjuna is, what is the nature of a spirit soul? And it is interesting to note that there is the beginning of a spiritual life. It is said in the Vedanta Sutra that Athato Brahma Jignasa, that in this human form of life, the real human form of life begins when we start become curious about the nature of a spirit soul. So as a spirit soul, we always have this nature of being curious. We always have this nature of being inquisitive. We always have this nature of being jigyasu. But this tendency of a spirit soul in the lower form of life, in the lower form of human form of life also, is being used to ask the very basic mundane questions about existence. How do I protect myself? How do I get my basic needs of food, shelter? How do I enjoy this world? How do I enjoy this body? How do I assert my own personal power? Or how do I basically do this defending, mating, sleeping and eating? There's a 4 basic quality, which is the very basic fundamental needs of everybody. And all the jigyasa goes in asking about questions pertaining to these basic things. But it is said in Vedanta Sutra, the real form of life begins, the real human form of life begins once we start questioning about our own true nature. When we start questioning about who am I? When we start asking question that why am I existing in this world? Am I simply existing to cater myself these basic needs of food, shelter, protection and the pleasure? Or there is something else which is existing beyond this and that I should be concerning about? So to answer this question, Krishna is saying that the nature of Brahman, the nature of eternal self is that it is indestructible and transcendental. It is of different nature altogether. So, but to be able to understand the spiritual being inside this material body is very difficult, because The world which we live in is completely made up of matter. The world which we perceive is completely made up of the material things. But how do we identify, how do we separate the spiritual self in this in this world of matter? How do we filter out, how do we separate, how do we segregate the spiritual spark from the material world? That's a very big question to ask now. Okay, we understand that we are a spirit soul, but how do we perceive that spiritual soul? How do we come to that basic perception that we are a spirit soul? How do we develop, and what is the different kind of perception which is required to have that? For an example, if we know that gold is gold is found in the earth, but it requires a great qualification to be able to segregate, to be able to identify which part of the earth have the gold. Because gold is there somewhere in the earth, and if we just start digging all the earth, it won't be profitable, it won't be efficient. So we have to find a specific place where the gold mine exists. There is a maximum amount of gold which exists, wherein they can do the mining work, and when they do the mining work, they can get sufficient amount of gold which is profitable for them, right? That's how we get gold from the earth. So then, who is employed in identifying those places where the earth has gold? Who are those people? Basically, they are geologists who can identify that which part of the earth, or which part of the existence, or which part of this geography has the gold. So they have the specific instruments, and they are very experienced, very learned in that. And when they comes through with their instrument, they can do some sort of testing with nitric acid, and they would come to know, okay, this place has the gold. If we dig this, if we mine this place, then we will get a lot of gold. That's why we come to know about a lot of gold reserves, right? Similarly, in a similar fashion, if we have to identify the spiritual spark, which is like a gold, which is buried in this earth of material world, which is buried in this body of earth itself, how do we perceive the spiritual spark there? If you have to perceive that, then as the process of gold mining requires the geologist, similarly this process of soul mining, we have to mine the spiritual spark, we have to mine the spiritual energy out of this body, requires the expert spiritual master, requires a guru, requires a guide who can helps us understand what is spirit soul, what it is nature, and how do we perceive that. So Srila Prabhupada explains that how do we perceive spiritual soul in our own self. So basically there are three things. This, if you see, this body itself is a very complicated biophysio machine, which has the physical stuff to it, which has a neurological stuff to it, which have a biological stuff to it, which have a mind, very complicated mind, software, and which have other layers of existence, and another layers of this material body, and of this subtle and the gross body. So now it is said that we can understand the ability to perceive soul by 6 fundamental things. So what are these 6 fundamental things by which we can understand the existence of soul, which the only soul will exhibit, but other will not be able to exhibit? The first thing is thinking. It is said that in a human form of life, we have the capability to think our thinking. What does it mean when I say you have to think our thinking? So when we think our thinking, we become a third person, because animal does not have these abilities to separate soul from the material body, so they cannot think their thinking. They always run in their default mode, wherein they just do whatever comes to their mind. They cannot reason with their thinking. They cannot change their thinking. They cannot do any of. They just program the way they are. The urges comes to them and they just respond to that. They just react to that. Right? That's how the animals has been designed to eat certain things, to live in a certain atmosphere, to do certain things, these kind of things. So, but human beings have a special capabilities to understand this ability, to understand this this particular aspect of human existence. That is to think our thinking. It means the meaning of thinking our thinking is that we are separate from the thinking itself. Thinking is separate and I am separate. And I can say whether I have a right thinking or a wrong thinking. Whether my mind is generating right kind of thinking, doing right kind of thinking, or wrong kind of thinking. Right? We all have this capability. It means there's a thinker which is beyond the thinking. The thinking happens by the thinker, and the thought is the thing which is being thought. So thoughts, the ideas, the thought means the ideas. The processing of ideas is a thinking, right? We have some thought, when we process that, when we connect different thoughts together, that's how thinking happens, correct? When we connect some ideas, when we connect some dots, when we connect some unconnected things, that's how we are known as we are thinking something. So we can think the thinking means I am a thinker which is separate from the thinking. The thinker is a quality of a spiritual being. The thinking is a quality of this material mind, and the thought comes based upon the material surroundings I live in. So the thought comes from outside, which is this material world, which is a part of this material world, comes to the mind which thinks, and the thinker who is observing that thinking is a spiritual spark. So our capability to be able to perceive our thinking, or to be able to see our thinking from a third person perspective in a non-judgmental, in an objective way, that is the power of a spiritual soul. The same goes with feelings. So the emotions is a thing which this material world triggers into us. It can be the anger, it can be the sadness, it can be sorrowful, these kind of things. These emotions are felt in the mind. They are feelings, right? Feelings are nothing but processing of emotions. Different emotions comes about. Like we were discussing about the thoughts. Different thoughts, when they connect by different means, they become thinking, and it is thinker which is doing the thinking. Similarly, in this fashion, emotions become the seed for feelings. Like the thought became a seed for thinking, similarly our emotions becomes the seed for feelings. But who am I? I am not these feelings, I am a feeler. I am feeling these thoughts. I am observing, I am experiencing these thoughts. When I say I am experiencing this thought, means I am a feeler. As I was thinker, I am the one who has a capability to think, and I am the one who is thinker. I am not a thinking. Thinking is separate, thinker is separate. Similarly here, feeling is separate and feeler is separate. It means it's just like watching a movie. The content of a movie is separate and who is observing is separate. So in this case, feeling is separate and thinking is separate. And the third important thing is the activity. Activity our body does, our gross body does, right? That we do activity. The activity, the ability to do activity is because of doing ability of a mind. Doing. We do something which is more of faculty of the mind. We can do something, and the activity is what comes out of the doings, right? But me as a person is a doer. Doer means it is me from whom this ability to do something comes about. So as a spirit soul, I am the doer, and the ability to do something is being generated from the mind, but it is me who is giving the mind that ability to do something. It is me who is pushing this body to act in a certain way, to perform those activities. So you can just think like this, that I'm the one I'm the real source of all the powers. I'm the real source of who is experiencing this feeling. I'm the real source who is experiencing this thinking. I'm the one who is experiencing this doing something, but I'm not doing it. I'm a doer. I'm a separate. But this body is doing something. This mind is doing something, but I'm the one who is powering that. So I'm the real power which is existing behind the thinking, feeling, and actions. But I'm not that feeling. I'm not the thinking. I'm not the doing activities. So that is how we can separate ourselves from this world and from this body. And the another important aspect of being a spirit soul is desire. So the desire is generated because of this material world. We live in this material world, and the ability to desire something, desiring. So desire is processed again like a thinking, is processed again like a feeling, is processed again like an activity, and it becomes a seed for me to desire something. Desiring. I'm desiring something. What are you desiring? You're desiring something else. Desire and desiring, two different things. Desire is of something of material world, something which is exist in the world. I desire, right? Desiring the tendency to get inclined toward that. And who is a person who's giving the power of to desire, or desirer, or who's desiring the real, who's powering this ability to desire something, is a spirit soul. So in that way we can understand that we have this material world, and we have this robot, we have this psycho-mechanical robot which is working, which is processing the thinking, which is processing the feeling, which is desiring something, and which is doing performing the activity of doing something, which is getting manifested in this world through seeing something, desire, thoughts, emotions, and this and that. But me as a person, as a spirit soul, is beyond that, which is I'm a feeler, not the feeling. I'm the thinker, not the thinking. I'm the desirer, not the desiring, and I am the doer, not this doing. That was very basic concept, but how do we use this concept? And what benefit can it give us when we understand this concept in a much more detailed way, when we apply that? See, whatever experience we go through in this world, let's say we are going through negative thinking. So because all our problems are rooted here now. The wrong kind of habits troubles us. Negative emotions troubles us. Having wrong desire troubles us. And having a certain wrong thinking troubles us. We think wrong about somebody, or we think wrong about ourselves. We feel negatively towards somebody, or we feel negatively towards us, or we feel positively towards somebody, or we feel positively towards us, or any situation for that matter. Right? So, but if I understand that this thinking, which is negative thinking, is running in me, I am not this negative thinking. The negative emotions which is running in me, I am not this negative emotions. My mind is urging me to do certain things, I am not this urge. Right? So urge leads to action. The basic component which we all struggle with is these basic four things. Desire something, desiring in the mind, thinking negative thought, feeling negatively, having some sort of urges. But the moment we understand, my mind is thinking, I'm an observer of this thinking. This mind becomes a screen for me to read something. It's just very simple. let's say this screen is being shared with you, right? You can read on this screen. When you are able to read the screen, does you become the screen? No, we don't become the screen. We don't become those words, right? Do we become those words while we are absorbed in reading those words? No. Or do we become that? Let's say we are watching some movie. I'm very absorbed in that movie and I'm identifying with one character there. Let's say I'm the hero or the heroine. So do I become that hero or heroine while I'm watching that? I don't become that. Although because of that deep gross absorption, I may not be able to segregate myself, separate myself and being able to my own world. But that does not mean that the world becomes me, that character becomes me. In that sense, this is a very fine point which we can draw from this understanding, and that can become the real source for healing from any kind of difficulty in our life. No matter how much pain we would have gone through, no matter how much trauma we would have gone through, no matter how much difficulty we would have gone through in our lives, but simply by understanding this one small concept of Bhagavad Gita, we can come out of everything at a moment. How? Because our mind was in that state of depression. Our mind was thinking like this. But I am separate from the mind. Nothing happened to me. Although I would have gone through that difficult situation in my life, but I as a spirit soul remain unscratched. Nothing has happened to me. Me as a spirit soul, me as a thinker, me as a feeler, me as a desirer, me as a actor, doer, nothing has happened to me. It was something wrong was going on the screen of a mind or outside us, which just came and went away. Like a different movie scenes. So if I am watching a movie, if I had seen a very horror movie, does this mean that my life become horror life? No. Yes, at that point of time I was going through that in the movie, but the moment I came out of the picture, I left that behind. It is not sticking to me anymore. Like this, we would have had many millions of lifetimes. But where are those experiences sticking to me now? Although it is recorded in the mind, but me as a person is always separate from this. So it means that's the power of a spiritual being. That although the spiritual being is in this body, but the spiritual being remain aloof from the body. So anything happens to the mind, anything happens to the body, anything happens to the thinking, whatever kind of thing, me as a person always remains different, always remains separated. It means I have the power that I can change that thinking. Let's say I am troubled because of some sort of negative emotions, but I hold this power to change that emotion and to experience something else. It is my own choice. So I have that power. So once I realize this basic concept, and once I start becoming that powerful, start regaining my power, start reclaiming my power, it is up to me how I want to think. It is up to me how I want to feel. It is up to me what do I do with the urges. Urges may come in the body, but it is up to me how to deal with that. I don't become I can deal with it. I have that power. I can change it. So once we realize this aspect of this power of a spiritual soul, that very moment we start transcending, we start transforming, we start changing this body mind system the way we want, the way spiritual soul wants. So that is how the real, even in the recent psychotherapical situation, they start recognizing how much powerful spiritual soul is, that we have this capability to think our thinking, we have the capability to feel our feelings, we have a capability to observe these urges and to change our action. That is this dynamic force which makes us different from the robot. Because once you program something in the robot, it cannot change in by itself. It can keep evolving, this is a different thing, keep on learning different things, keep on adjusting. But it cannot completely redo the programming. The original program always remains there. But me as a person can keep on changing many different programmings, can keep on changing many different directions, can keep on changing many different kinds of. I can have a say that how do I want to feel, whether I want to feel miserable, whether I want to feel happy. Although the situation may remain same, situation may urge or force you to feel negatively, but it is up to me. How do I change my thinking? How do I change my thinking pattern? So this dysfunctional cognitive, emotional and behavioral aspect can be changed when we understand that the real spiritual soul power, and then we can make this dysfunctional cognitive, behavioral emotions into functional thinking, functional emotion, functional action, which helps us. So that's how we understand this beautiful understanding of a spirit soul, and how we can start perceiving that in our day-to-day life, and how much we can benefit from this concept. So